you're a well-balanced individual, you haven't thought much about child sex trafficking. But it's real, if ugly. So will you join me in thinking for a few minutes about sin, darkness, and hope? Hi, I'm Rex Rogers, and this is episode number 99 of Discerning What Is Best, a podcast applying unchanging biblical principles in a rapidly changing world and a Christian worldview to current issues in everyday life. My wife and I recently went to the cinema to watch Sound of Freedom, the movie featuring Passion of the Christ Jim Caviezel as a federal agent who pursues sex traffickers to rescue a child. As you might expect with a topic like this, not all the scenes are easy to watch. But for my money, I think the director and the actors did a good job of drawing attention to this global evil in a way that hopefully raises consciousness, concern, and action. Sound of Freedom draws upon the real life of Tim Ballard, a U.S. Department of Homeland Security agent who is credited with saving countless children, largely from outside the United States, from traffickers who forced them into prostitution rings aimed at pedophiles. Jim Caviezel plays Tim Ballard in the film, and his wife is portrayed by actress Mira Sorvino. Years earlier, in 2005, Sorvino played the lead role as a U.S. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement agent, ICE, in a television miniseries called Human Trafficking. Her boss in the miniseries is portrayed by actor Donald Sutherland. The miniseries followed the stories of 3 women and girls kidnapped and sold into sex slavery, all of them eventually working out of New York City for an enormously wealthy and ruthless Russian crime boss. The miniseries is especially good at portraying how women and girls get sucked into the trade. This is most assuredly not a so-called victimless crime. Human trafficking involves the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act. To lure victims into trafficking situations, traffickers use various approaches, like violence, manipulation, false promises of well-paying jobs, or romantic relationships. Remember the first Taken movie starring Liam Neeson? In it, a retired CIA operative, Neeson, crosses the globe to rescue his 17-year-old daughter after she had been kidnapped by a group of Albanian smugglers while traveling in France. She and her friend were first enticed by meeting a charming young Frenchman. Then she is betrayed, kidnapped, and sold into the sex trade. Of course, this and later Taken films are primarily vehicles for showcasing Neeson as an action hero. But the first film is especially on point as to how even teenagers can be duped and, well, taken. If you are interested in going deeper, several other films or documentaries have been made that examine various aspects of this evil perversion. One that combines greed, sexual hedonism, crime, power, politics, and corruption. Hyperlinks to these sources may be found in the transcript to this podcast. After her earlier miniseries role, Mira Sorvino stayed involved with this heinous crime. From 2009 to 2012, she was a United Nations Goodwill Ambassador for combating human trafficking. I recommend Sorvino's miniseries Human Trafficking, which you can acquire inexpensively online. Back to the new film, Sound of Freedom. You'd think that, if anything, the ideological left might find morally compelling the fact that children are being coerced and abused by a huge international sex trade. But believe it or not, I've read several reviews of Sound of Freedom that seem oblivious to this issue involving children, choosing rather to politicize the motives of the producers and the actors, accusing them of conspiracy theories and being tools of the far right, yada yada. Really? People can't even agree that child trafficking is an unholy scourge. Well, I, for one, recommend you watch Sound of Freedom. I respect Jim Caviezel and Mira Sorvino for their involvement, not just as professional actors, but as people who care about other human beings. The film presents a real issue, and for all the wretchedness, there is hope in the end. It is estimated, that's right, I said estimated, because one of the problems with stopping human trafficking is getting reliable numbers. Who's going to provide them? Law enforcement counts what it knows, but criminals know far more. and they aren't going to volunteer information. So it is estimated that approximately 1 million people are trafficked each year globally, and that between 20,000 and 50,000 are trafficked in the United States, which is one of the largest destinations for victims of the sex trafficking trade. Now, based on multiple sources I read, I think the number of trafficked people and children is far higher. There are tremendous numbers of kids, a multitude of kids, that are being sold as sex slaves today in America. These are American kids, American-born. 50% to 60% of them coming out of the foster care industry. 85% of victims that are trafficked here are from here. The United Nations divides human trafficking into 3 categories: sex trafficking, labor trafficking, and the removal of organs. Sex slavery involves males and females, both adults and children, and constitutes an estimated 58% of all trafficked activities. California consistently has the highest human trafficking rates in the United States. This is followed by Texas, Florida, and New York. Hard to believe, but in the United States, human trafficking wasn't illegal until 2000, when the Trafficking Victims Protection Act was passed, which made it a federal crime. In the U.S., there are no official number of human trafficking victims, but estimates place it in the hundreds of thousands. Globally, an estimated 25 million people are subjected to human trafficking and forced labor, which is responsible for an estimated $150 billion annually in illicit profits. The consequences of human sex trafficking on its victims are profound and long-lasting. Physically, victims may endure sexually transmitted infections, unwanted pregnancies, physical injuries, and drug addiction. Emotionally and spiritually, they suffer from trauma, depression, anxiety, the post-traumatic stress disorder, often requiring extensive therapy and rehabilitation to regain a sense of normalcy. Furthermore, the social stigma associated with sex trafficking can leave victims isolated and shunned by society, even their families, exacerbating their suffering. The thriving underground market perpetuates violence, organized crime, and corruption. It undermines the rule of law, weakens institutions, and fosters an environment of fear and exploitation. As Sound of Freedom demonstrates, children are the most vulnerable and tragic victims of human trafficking. It is believed that 1 in 5 human trafficking victims are children. Often kidnapped or coerced into the trade, they are robbed of their innocence and subjected to unimaginable horrors. The emotional, spiritual, and psychological, and often physical scars inflicted on these young souls can haunt them for a lifetime, hindering their development and impeding their ability to lead fulfilling lives. Human sex trafficking is abhorrent. It treats human beings as non-entities, perpetuates violence, undermines law and order in free societies, and is an example of man's inhumanity to man, an evil straight out of the pit. There are Christian organizations, among them Women at Risk International, that combat human trafficking and work to help women, girls, and boys enslaved. Sexual sin and slavery are together as old as mankind. Both sins violate the character of God and the fact that He created every man, woman, boy, and girl in His image. Let's pray, and let's take action to assure Sound of Freedom sows seeds that fall on good soil. It could be our children, our loved ones that we save. Well, we'll see you again soon. This podcast is about discerning what is best. If you find this thought-provoking and helpful, follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Download an episode for your friends. For more Christian commentary, check my website, REXM as in Martin, that's rexmrogers.com. And remember, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm.